بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا. اللهم زدنا علما إنك أنت عليم حكيم. اللهم اجعل هذه المحاضرة حجة لنا لا حجة علينا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. A continuation of our class. The title of this class should actually say Zad was stuck there. Inshallah, maybe we'll change that. The class is our second class in the book Zad was stuck there, which is a fiqh book from the school of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we want to cover a few things. Before we actually get into the book, we're going to cover some beneficial terms that are used when studying the school of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. And in addition to that, we're also going to go over the conditions of al-ijtihad. What is ijtihad? You know what ijtihad is? What is it? What is al-ijtihad? Does anyone know? No. Right. We'll talk about that inshallah in a minute, and that's when we get to that point. We want to explain this inshallah. The first part, when you study a particular madhab, as we mentioned before, when you study a madhab, you're studying what? You're studying the way in which a particular scholar extracted rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah. The way in which a particular scholar extracted rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah. It's possible, or why do you think it's possible for a scholar to have more than one ruling on a particular issue? Why is that? Why do you think that is? Why would a scholar have, say again?
Because of the time and the date of the issue.
Because of the time and the date of the issue. Okay. What's another reason? Why would a scholar have more than one ruling on a particular issue? More than one verdict on a particular, for example, one position you might say is halal, the next position he says is hated, the next position he says is recommended. Why would he change? What are some of the reasons why a scholar would change a verdict? Or is a scholar even allowed to change a verdict? Is a scholar allowed to change a verdict? We don't know. What do you think?
I think
That's
finds out.
Say again?
the scholar of the method.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Is a scholar allowed to change a verdict? Like, so a scholar may change the verdict on something because perhaps he looked at the issue and he had some evidence, and then later on he had found out that that evidence may not have been strong enough, or he found a statement from one of the companions that maybe that scholar didn't see before, etc. So changing a position is wet, meaning it happens. But in a particular method, why do we have methods? Because the purpose of a method is to help you extract rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah. So every method, for example, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmed, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abi Hanifa, all of these different madhab and others, they agree on fundamental things, like for example, taking rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah, taking rulings from the consensus of the Sahaba, meaning what they agree on, taking something called al-ijma', taking something called al-qiyas, which is analytical deduction, right? And there are others. But having said that, we're going to talk about today, inshallah, Imam Ahmed's step process in extracting verdicts from the Quran and the Sunnah. And I'll give you an example, just to make it easy to follow along, right? Putting a chair in the masjid, for example. What is the ruling on putting a chair or placing a chair in the masjid? Now, I'm using this as an example to show how scholars come to verdicts on a particular issue. So the first thing they're going to do is, they're going to look at the text. Is there something in the Quran or Sunnah that says we can or cannot put chairs in the masjid? So for example, they're going to look through the text. And it says, أول الأصل الأول النصوص فإذا وجد النص أفتى بموجبه. That if they found some text from the Quran or the Sunnah, for example, that says it's permissible to put chairs in the masjid, for example, then they'll put chairs in the masjid. Let's say, for example, Imam Ahmed could not find, or there's nothing from the Quran and the Sunnah that stipulates you can or cannot put a chair in the masjid. Right? There's nothing in the Quran and the Sunnah that says you can or cannot put a chair in the masjid. So the second thing Imam Ahmed, meaning Imam Ahmed, according to his school of jurisprudence or legal rulings in Islam, then I move to the second thing. The second thing is ma afta bihi as-sahaba. Is that he'll look to what he found the Sahaba agreeing on. Some scholars will say that this would be considered ijma, consensus. Some say it would be considered a consensus, right? Some say that it would be a consensus. So, if you found the Sahaba agreed that it is permissible to put chairs in the masjid, and you didn't find anyone opposing it, then Imam Ahmed would have taken that position. He would have what? Taken that position. Let's say he did not find a fatwa from the Sahaba. He did not find a fatwa from the Sahaba. So the next thing he'll look for is إِذَا اخْتُلِفَ الصَّحَابَةُ تَخَيَّرَ مِنْ أَقْوَالِهِمْ. That if he found that the companions differed, then he would pick one of the statements of the companions that agreed with that. He would pick one of the statements of the companions that agreed with his position about putting chairs in the masjid. Does that make sense so far? Right. Now, let's say he went through the nusus, the Quran and Sunnah, did not find anything about placing chairs in the masjid. Then from there, he went and looked for an ijma, consensus from the Sahaba. He did not find anything to support that there. Then he said, okay, if we can't find a consensus, we have at least one companion speaking about putting chairs in the masjid, for example. He could not find anyone there. The next thing he would do is look for al-akhd al-mursal, al-hadith al-da'if, meaning they would take two things. One is a mursal. A mursal is, say for example, we have a statement where one of the Sahaba said the Prophet ﷺ said this, right? But the one who narrated that to us did not hear that from the Prophet ﷺ. This is considered mursal, meaning the chain does not go back to the Prophet ﷺ. Or they skip somebody. So let's say, for example, let me correct that. They skip someone. So let's say, for example, we have a tabi'i, and he skipped the companion, and he said the Prophet ﷺ said. And the companion that actually narrated is missing. So he skipped over a person. Does that make sense? Right. In this case, this is called mursal. Imam Ahmed would then look for something that supported that. He would look for a statement like that. If he could not find that, then he will look for hadith da'if, a weak hadith. But a weak hadith, according to Imam Ahmed, was not a hadith that were weak. Rather, it was a hadith that is considered from the different types of hadith al-hasan, meaning it doesn't reach the level of sahih, but it's hasan, meaning it's from the levels of authentic hadith. If you cannot find anything that would support that, meaning about the chair in the masjid, that's the issue, that's what we're discussing. Then we'll move on to the next issue, and this will be considered al-qiyas, meaning he will look at the chair, he will say, is this compared to something else? Can we put chairs? He will figure it out on his own based on something else to compare it to. This is called analytical deduction, or it will be classified as being qiyas. This is in general how Imam Ahmed came to his rulings. Any questions about that? If there's no questions about that, then we're going to speak to another issue. We live in a time where our Prophet ﷺ, before we get into the text, it's very important because Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah, and the other scholars of our time, or in the past rather, they had with them people who studied with them, other scholars who studied, put the work in, and produced knowledge, etc. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and it serves as a reminder to all of us, especially now in the time that we live in now. In this hadith, عن عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, إن الله لا يقبض العلم انتزاعا ينزعها أو ينتزعها من العباد ولكن يقبض العلم بقدر العلماء. النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not remove the knowledge from the people, meaning he will not snatch the knowledge away from the people. He said, however, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take the knowledge from the people by the death of the scholars, the death of the ulama. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove the knowledge by allowing or causing the scholars to die away. And the hadith says, حتى إذا لم يبق عالما اتخذ الناس رؤوس جهالا فسئلوا فأفتوا بغير علم وضلوا وأضلوا. And Nabi Ali, in this hadith, you can find in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. And Nabi Ali salatu wasalam, he said that to the point that there will be no more scholars around or in a particular area or what have you, so that people would begin to take the ignorant ones from among us as their leaders, for su'ilu, and they will be asked questions about the religion, fa'abtu, and they will give fatawa with no knowledge in the deen, fadallu, they are misguided, wa adallu, and they will misguide others. This is prevalent in the time that we live in right now. Prevalent. In fact, this issue is so pertinent that it's important that we talk about this, especially now before we open up Zadam and stuff there to speak about fiqh, jurisprudence, legal verdicts in the religion of Islam. We live in a time where many people they speak about Allah's religion and they don't understand the rules of engagement. And when I say rules of engagement, what's understood by that is, in order to give a verdict in a religion of Islam, there are conditions that must be met. There are conditions that must be met. And so, inshallah ta'ala, before we close out, we're going to discuss what those conditions are in a general sense. As we think back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it becomes very clear that there's going to be a time where there are no scholars. I'm not saying that time is here, because there are ulama still, but in certain parts of the world, there may not be any scholars there, or there may be very few. Or there could be scholars there, but people don't understand them as being scholars, right? However, there are a lot of people who speak about Allah's religion and may not have any information or any knowledge that's traceable, right? Any knowledge that's verifiable, if that makes sense. So, before we start talking about the conditions of giving verdicts, and that's ijtihad. Ijtihad is when you're able to look at an issue and you don't understand, there's no clear evidence one way or another, and you have to apply some study from yourself to reach that particular verdict. Turn it up. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Right. So the first thing is, according to Imam Al-Shatibi, rahimahullah, he mentions something very important. When it comes to giving ijtihad, the conditions of giving verdicts, so arriving at verdicts, and when we say verdicts, what are we talking about? Make no mistake about it, brothers and sisters in Islam. If I tell you it's haram to go to this particular masjid, this is a verdict. This is a ruling in Islam that I give. If I tell you don't go to this masjid, or this brother is an innovator, or that sister's not, all of these are verdicts. What is a verdict? A verdict in this sense, it means that you are speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, there's a book from Ibn al-Qayyim, it's called I'nam al-Muwaqqa'in, meaning you're signing off on verdicts from the creator of the heavens and earth. So for the Muslim who feels the need to speak about other Muslims and make statements or rulings about them, understand that you are placing yourself in the position to speak about Allah's religion, and you're signing off on verdicts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you're qualified to do that, by all means, go for it. But if you are not qualified, if you can look and you do not fulfill the stipulations, the conditions that are required for a person to speak about Allah's religion as it relates to halal and haram, then you should humble yourself and sit down. You should humble yourself and sit down and not speak about those issues and zip it, as the Sheikh just mentioned. And this is important because we've made knowledge of the religion to seem so trivial, as if it's not that important, meaning studying the deen, learning about the deen correctly. People believe, for the most part, that we can go to Sheikh Google and find out information, and we think that that is sufficient. So, we're going to get started, inshallah. Any questions about that? Any questions? Any questions, Sheikh?
No.
Well, it hasn't.
No.
Right. All right. So the first thing, as I mentioned, Imam Al-Shatibi, rahimahullah, he mentioned, before we get into the conditions, he considers this to be a condition, and it is ilmu maqasid al-sharia. Ilmu maqasid al-sharia. What is maqasid al-sharia? And this is very important. Maqasid al-sharia is to understand the intent behind Islamic legislation. What is the wisdom of this, and what is the wisdom of that? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this ruling versus that? Why? This is from the maqasid, the qasd, the intent behind the sharia. Does that make sense? Right. So those are some of the things that, or the first thing that Imam Al-Shatibi, rahimahullah, he mentioned. However, we're going to speak about some of the issues or some of the other conditions that I mentioned. And then when we finish, we'll mention various sources you can find if you would like to know that information. The first thing, As it relates to the conditions of ijtihad, you have to go back to the scholars of usul, meaning the scholars of usul al-fiqh, the foundational fundamentals of the religion. All right. So the first condition that they mentioned for ijtihad is al-Islam. That's easy. So a person that's listening says, okay, I fit that condition. You put a check next to your name, right? Alhamdulillah, I'm Muslim. So that's the first condition that I can open my mouth now, right? The second condition is al-aql, that you must have the intellect. Person may say, okay, I fit that description. The third condition is al-bulugh, meaning you reach the age of Islamic puberty. So that means that the pen is lifted and you are required to pray, fast, and do everything else, and make hajj and everything else that a Muslim is supposed to do. So if a person's listening to the first three, they say, okay, I guess that's me so far. Almost everything in Islam, those are the first three conditions for almost everything. Islam, aql, intellect, and reaching Islamic purity or Islamic puberty. The next one is Ishrafi ala nusus al-Quran. That now, the next issue is you must understand the status of the Quran, meaning the text of the Quran that deal with giving verdicts in a religion. Some say that there are 500 verses in the Quran that you must know in order to give Islamic legislative rulings. That would mean if a brother or sister tells you, you cannot pray at this place or that place, it is haram, it is impermissible. The understanding of that would be that that brother or sister knows these 500 said ayahs in the Quran that speak about giving verdicts. That they would know what those 500 verses in the Quran are. And those are the verses that deal specifically with Islamic legislation, rulings. So you must know what those verses are. Like, that's just from the aspect of the Quran. The next one is that that person who says you can't go here, you can't go this, those Muslims are this, those Muslims are that, they're innovators, etc., etc. The next thing you must be able to do is know the Sunnah, meaning all of the hadith that deal with giving verdicts in a religion. You must have knowledge of all of these, not 3 out of 500 or however many it is. You need to know all of them that have to deal with giving verdicts in the religion. If you find that you do not have that knowledge, you have to be quiet. You have to check yourself. The next thing, if you reach that point, the next thing is you must know the places in the religion where there is a consensus. You must know the places in the religion where there is a consensus. And what I mean by that is you must know where the companions agreed on issues to be able to call them a consensus. You must know where they are. Not a few of them, rather you must know all of them. This is from the requirements of saying this Muslim's innovator, that Muslim's on the Sunnah, you're this, she's that. The people that speak like that are the people that have all of this. If you find, and now what we're doing is, we're giving the people tools. When you hear people talking, 9 times out of 10, they don't have this. Maybe you need to remind them, Muslim, when a person opens their mouth, just pull this out. Wait, do you know this? They're going to say no. You should tell them, fear Allah. Think about that meeting that you're going to have with Allah. Part of the job of the shaitan, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, زُكِّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ, that our evil actions, the shaitan makes it look good to us. Allah says, Zuyyina lahu. Bad has been made to look good. Su amalihi. Bad has been made to look good. Our evil actions begin to look good to us. And we think that we're upon khayr. We think that we're upon good. So then, and there are many more. So if you find yourself listening to someone speaking ill, for example, there's another thing, right? What do you say the brother said? There's only how many masjids in the city? 2 masjids on the Sunnah in the whole city of Philadelphia. My brother said, it was brought to my attention to that. One of the brothers that studied Islam overseas, and Lord guide him, he said that there are only 2 places in the city that teach the Sunnah, or places of the Sunnah and all. So that right there is a verdict. It's a verdict. You put yourself in a position to speak about Allah's deen, and that person is not qualified. The person doesn't know this stuff. The next thing. We also must understand the science of qiyas. Qiyas is analytical deduction. And I can tell you right now, having studied this stuff, I'm not saying we know all of it, no, I'm not saying this. Sometimes people may mention stuff to put other people down so they can springboard themselves. It's not what we're saying. What I'm telling you is, we study qiyas. And qiyas is one of the hardest parts of studying usul al-fiqh. In order to give verdicts, you have to master that. I know for a fact, to brothers that are saying, don't go to this masjid or that masjid, they have not mastered any of that. You may say, how do you know? Because if they did, they would open their mouths. Yes.
Say that.
Yes, yes. In English, it would be considered analytical deduction. I'll give you an example of what that means, right? If someone were to say to you, is it haram for me to get high? What's the ruling on getting high? Can I get high, yes or no? Are you sure? You ain't say that. I can get high.
You've been told me to keep quiet. You gotta get that out of me. I ain't making no jokes. I ain't even laughing about
No,
it. You've been told me.
Right now, Jake, we this is training, right?
Yeah, but I'm
Can you
training
get
with my
high?
mouth closed.
No doubt. Can we get high? No, we can't get high. Is there something from the Quran that tells us we can't get high? The word high, like we can't get high. Something clear. Is there something clear from the Quran that says we can't get high? Everybody's scared now. No. We're training. You're not going to find an ayah in the Quran that says you can't get high. Like smoking weed and perks and all this stuff people do. You're not going to find an ayah that says you can't do that. You're not going to find a hadith that says you can't do that. You're not going to find ijma', meaning consensus of the companions that say you can't do that. Well, what evidence do you have? We have what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran about drinking alcohol. It's haram to drink alcohol. So a person will say, that's drinking alcohol. But we're not talking about getting high. That's what Allah said you can't drink alcohol. Well, he said he's taking perks, and he's cool with that. That's different. So the scholars that look at those issues, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make drinking alcohol haram? What was the reason? The reason is that Allah yukhammir al-aql. Yukhammir al-aql. Yukhammir al-aql means it causes the intellect to fluctuate. So then the scholars of usul, they have a principle, right? Al-hukm yadurru ma'a illatihi wujudan wa adaman. Al-hukm yadurru ma'a illatihi wujudan wa adaman. And what this means is the ruling, right? The reason why alcohol is haram because it causes the intellect to fluctuate. So what this means, what I just said in Arabic, it means that in anything that you can find that causing the intellect to fluctuate, that it takes the same ruling as drinking alcohol. This is called analytical deduction. Everyone is not qualified to do that. I'm not qualified to do that. I know what it is. I can recognize it. In fact, there are even books. We studied with Sheikh Nizar Qiyas, and he taught us Qiyas by studying a book called Al-Kafi from Imam Ibn Qudamah. And we will look in Al-Kafi, this fiqh book, and Ibn Qudamah, he would show the student how to recognize Qiyas and how to use it. It's all throughout this book. So we did a whole volume of that. We did a whole mujalla, a whole volume of going through Qiyas. But so after that, that's that right there knocks everybody in this city out the box. That's it. I don't know anybody. Sheikh say Mumkin. Maybe Sheikh Thar, Mumkin, maybe. Everybody else that I know of. I don't know everybody, but the people here that's in our vicinity, no, not qualified at all. Zero. The next one is and yakun arifan bilisan al-arab, that you must know the Arabic language. And what they mean by the Arabic language here is that you must know the difference between haqiqa and majaz. That which is when a person speaks in reality, or majaz. How do you translate majaz? Come on, what's majaz? Hypothetical? No, not hypothetical. Huh? I don't even know how to translate the word. See, majaz, haqiqa, metaphorical. So you have to know the difference when a person is speaking in reality or metaphorical speech, right? In the Arabic language, you have to be able to distinguish between this and that. That's a skill. That's one aspect. Say again. Like, for example, it's like something that's not real. If you find somebody says, "Well, an essay," talking about a person is a lion, right? You have in Arabic, it speaks like that. For example, she's a moon, or he's a lion. Does that mean he's really a lion, or does it mean he's strong like a lion? This is metaphorical speech, right? Versus, hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, in any event, you have to be knowledgeable about all of that, right? It is more to it than that. The next one is ma'rifat al-nasikh wa mansukh. You must also know that which is in the Quran that has been abrogated, and that which is the abrogator. What that means is we have things in the Quran, rulings in the Quran, and that no longer exist. You'll read an ayah in the Quran, and this ruling in the Quran is no longer exists. It no longer exists right now, but it's still there. You have to understand what verses in the Quran are abrogated, and what abrogated it, meaning what removed it. If you don't know these things, you can't say this Muslim's an innovator because you're not qualified. You're not qualified. And the problem is, since the internet has become so easily accessible and we can Google everything, then we think that Google made us qualified. That's not a substitute for knowledge. If that were the case, a lot of people go to college. Why do people go to school? You just go to Google. You don't need to study anything. Like, huh? What's that question? I can't hear. Example of what?
What removed the eye?
What? Give an example of an ayah that's removed. I can give you a hukm that's removed that comes to mind right now. What is it? A sheikh or a sheikh? I'm not sure. I gotta go back. Listen, I'm not prepared to speak about nasikh wa mansukh. Give me a minute. Maybe after class, I'll think about it and come up with some examples of it. I should have worked some. And this is how you know that I'm not qualified. That's more of a proof, right? So an abrogator, so let me clarify this. An abrogator overrides the thing that has been abrogated. Just so that we know that. The abrogator, meaning the verse, the ayah, the hadith that remove, I'll give you a ruling that may have been abrogated in the hadith. كنتم نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور فزوروها. النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام, and this just came to my head. النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام, he used to make it prohibited to visit the graves. Right? It was at one point in time it was prohibited to visit the graves. You could not go visit the graves. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he came with another hadith where he said, "Kuntu nahaytukum an ziyaratul qubur fazuruha." He said, I used to prohibit you from visiting the graves, but now you can visit the graves. This hadith was an abrogator for the previous one. For the previous one, making it impermissible for people to visit the graves. That was easy. Alhamdulillah. The next one.
When we pray.
Huh?
When we pray.
In the direction that we pray. That's another one. The next issue. And all of this, in order for a person to give verdicts in a religion, they must be well versed in all of these issues that we're talking about. The next one. معرفة حال الرواة في قوة وضعف وتمييز الصحيح من الفاسد. That you must know the rulings on narrators of hadith. You must know their condition in detail. Now, I will say this. Some of the brothers did study hadith. I'll give them that. I'm not saying he might be like super strong with it, but a lot of people. But we're not even talking about the educators. We're talking about the people that's walking around every day that come to the masajid that say talk about other Muslims and they're not qualified. This is what we're talking about, right? Like the next one. أن يكون ذا ملكة يستطيع يستنبط بها الأحكام. That you have reached a level where you can look at the Quran and the Sunnah. Like, I'll give you an example. You've reached a level where you can look at a hadith, and you can look at a hadith and you can extract every ruling from the hadith on your own with the skills that you have. I'm not sure if anybody here can do that. More specifically, the ones that open their mouth and say you can't go to this masjid, you can't go there. And what I mean by extracting, I mean extracting from your own skill set, not Sheikh such and such said about this that I can know. I mean, you can look at it on your own and you have the skills to do it on your own. If you can't do that, then you should remain silent when it comes to speaking about Islam and issues pertaining to other Muslims where you're not qualified to speak about. The next thing, it says that a person must have al-adala. They must be just. The person must be just, known to be just. How is it then, am I being just if I can speak about a Muslim that I don't even know? You have brothers and sisters who speak about Muslims that they see, but they don't even know. They don't know their name. They don't know their situation. And like many scholars of Islam mention, al-hukm ala shay far'un an tasawwurihi. That giving a ruling on something, you have to be able to see it and understand what you're looking at. You'll find that the Prophet ﷺ, he gave some rulings to some Sahaba and a different ruling for another Sahaba, and it may have been the same issue. Why is that? Because the Prophet ﷺ knew his people. He knew his people. How is it then that we have people who have not even put the effort in to study Islam, speaking about innocent Muslims who they don't even know? Just let that sink in. You don't even know this brother, you don't know this sister. But you have enough audacity to say that they're not one of you. You are. You are. That's heavy, right? Based on what? Because you attend a certain place? We're not Christians, guys. We don't have this group thing and say we're all saved. You gotta put work in Islam. You gotta put work in. And it's okay if a person is a worshiper. Meaning you worship Allah. You worship Allah, you practice Islam for yourself, you help your family, that's it. But when you start talking about other Muslims outside of yourself, and you're judging another Muslim's Islam, and you yourself are not qualified to do that, that's dangerous. That's dangerous. So with that, those are some of the general rulings as it relates to the conditions of giving verdicts in a religion of Islam. Perhaps we'll even discuss this again. We're going to start talking about this more and more. I think this is something that needs to be reiterated time and time and time again, so that the average lay Muslim, a Muslim that walks the streets every day and they hear this stuff, we can equip you with weapons so that you can say, wait a minute, brother, do you have all these qualifications? No, I don't. Okay, then maybe you should be quiet. And I'll tell you another thing before we stop the class. There was a brother, when we studied overseas, there was a situation where we know that we have when people speak about Allah's religion, right? You know that you're going to have people to say, this is halal, this is haram, this is halal, this is haram. You have to remember that when you make these statements, you're actually putting yourself in position to speak on behalf of Allah's deen, and you're not qualified. This is dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous for yourself, and it's extremely dangerous for the people around you. You can get to a point where you speak about Allah's religion, and you can make people run away from the deen. How many people want to be responsible on the day of judgment for pushing someone away from Allah's religion because you thought you knew something that you didn't know? How many times when we went to school, how many times when we got there, we started looking around, we didn't think the scholars knew stuff. We saw, oh man, we thought someone wanted to follow the sunnah. And we ignorant coming from America. That's what we thought, right? Get over there, we meet these scholars. But the hadith says this, they have a better understanding of the hadith than we do. And here's where it gets really funny. When you study Islam, right? In the very beginning, you're hungry because you want to learn. After a while, especially if you went to a place like a university, you get to test your knowledge, right? You take tests, you have quizzes. So if you start knocking the stuff out, getting all A's, you're going to start feeling yourself. Makes sense. You're going to start feeling yourself. So when you start feeling yourself, then you step into another realm. You step into the point where you think you know everything because you're learning something. This is while you're studying. We're not talking about here in America. We're talking about while you're studying. You get to a point where you think you know stuff. And then if Allah blesses you to humble you, then you're going to realize you're going to reach another level and you realize you don't know anything at all now. And at that point in time, that's when you fall all the way back. Remember the time when Shaykh Ibn Majid said to us? I'm going to mention that. One time before I think I had just finished the Arabic program. We had just finished the Arabic program 2 years, 2.5 years. No, you just finished. So I might have been my second year in the college. Second year or first year. 4 years. My second year of the College of Law, the College of Judicial Law. My second year, right? Saeed had just finished the Arabic program. We said, okay, we want to open up what was it? A blog or something. Was it Akhbar al-Mecca? Yeah, we came to the Sheikh, we was coming for a class. We had our books with us because now we thought we knew stuff, right? We know stuff, right? We know stuff. We know a little bit of Arabic. We think we was good. We thought we were good, right? Huh? Yeah, we was translating, putting stuff on the internet. We thought we was all right? So we go to the Sheikh. No, I'm serious. We go to the Sheikh. So the class is about to start. Before the class started, we stopped and said, Sheikh, we want to talk about this blog we want to do. It's called Mecca News, right? So we like, look, Sheikh, we want to do this. This will be translated, And then he went off. He looked at us and said, if this is what y'all want to do, you don't have to finish school. You can just go back now. You still need you staying here. If you wanted to be a translator, you didn't have to come here for that. And if you wanted to be a translator, your few years in the Arabic program is good enough. You can leave now. If you want to study the deen, then you need to be quiet. You need to shut your mouth. You need to focus. At that point in time, we was just like that. You know, we went there feeling big, and then we just shrunk. After that, I don't think we put nothing on the internet for years after that. I think we fell all the way back. Because the thing is, when you know that you don't know, that's when you can sit back and say, you know what, I'm cool with not knowing everything. I'm all right with that. The problem is when you're in a place and you think that Islam is just that simple. It is simple, but when it comes to the knowledge part, you think it's that simple. You can just say, oh, I Googled it. Those brothers are innovators. Stay away from them. This is a crime. In fact, if we were in the land of the Muslims and you accuse somebody, they can take you to court for that. Just pay attention to this. This is how serious it is. If you sit back and say you accuse a whole masjid of not following the Sunnah of the Prophet, if you accuse a group of Muslims of that, now they can file a lawsuit against you in the land of the Muslims. And guess what you have to do? The one who made the claim, and then the Nabi he said, Al-Bayyina ala Mudda'i. Now you are responsible for bringing the clarification. Well, guess what? The clarification is, I saw you sitting with this Muslim, sat with that Muslim, talk to that person who, what? That doesn't work in Islam. It's all, but it's a qarina. Type. Even when we use qarina, how do you translate qarina? An indicator. It's a sign that you could be affiliated with this one or that. Signs are not proofs. Do you know, and just so that we know this, in Islam, and I'm going to mention this because a question came up the other day with a brother, and this is a fiqh issue, right? The fact that we study qada, judicial law in Islam, just so you know this, there's a situation with a brother, he has kids. There's a situation with a brother that has kids, and he found out that the DNA test said that the kids weren't his. The DNA test said that the kids were not his, right? Now, in Islam, now we're talking about qarina because you talk to this brother, you talk to that brother, you talk to that brother, so now you're enemy, right? In Islam, I need you guys to understand this very carefully. In Islam, a DNA test is not proof in and of itself. It's a qarina, it's evidence. But what Islam does, Islam is in place to make you confess to the wrong that you've done. Does that make sense? In other words, if someone says this is not your child in Islam, the DNA test comes back and says it's 98% that is not your child. Right? In Islam, that alone is not proof. It's a qarina, it's an indicator, it's a sign, but the court won't just accept that. That person has to have some type of admission, something else has to be there. Even if you saw a person commit a crime on video, that's not strong enough because it could be a mistake with the video. It could be, Islam looks for the possibility, even if there's a 1% chance that it's a mistake, Islam is going to exercise that 1%. Does that make sense? So then how much more so when it comes to defaming another Muslim that you don't even know? If Islam is going to give the benefit of the doubt to the one who at their DNA test said that the man's not the father, but Islam says not going to accept that all the way just like that because there's a 0.1% that he might be. So Islam is still going to respect that until there's some other. How much more so this person gets a pass, or you're looking for an excuse? But what about the one who you say this Muslim's an innovator? Don't pray with them. You don't even know them. And the thing is, we have to understand that Islam is a just religion. Islam is very just. The ones that are unjust, or unjust is us. We're unjust. And people, we can oppress people, but Islam does not oppress anyone. Just think about that. They have you on video doing something you shouldn't be doing. You're in an Islamic court. That video is not strong enough evidence to convict. You need more. They're going to find holes in your story. They're going to find this because they don't want to give you that case. Islam doesn't want to give that person that case. I'll give you another example about Islamic law. How many people are familiar with if a person steals, they can get their hand cut off? Everyone should. You heard this before, right? I've never heard that. But Nabi alayhi salatu said, he said if he saw his own daughter steal, he would have cut her hand off, right? So the people who hate Islam, they say, oh, this is a vigilante, ruthless religion, etc., right? But what they don't tell you is that if that person is poor, that person has had some type of food drought, if that person has no way of getting any food, then that is removed from that person. That punishment is removed. Even if that person stole money from you so they can feed themselves, they're not going to get their hand cut off for that. In fact, it's obligatory for you to lend that Muslim money so he can get some food. Right? All of this is part of Islamic law that people don't know. In any event, we're going to stop with that, inshallah. Any questions? Any of the sisters have any questions, inshallah? Thanks. Huh?
I didn't hear that. I had one question.
Thanks, brother.
In the very beginning, you said that you want to take the emails.
Imam Ahmed.
We're going to take the emails saying on a particular issue. Okay? And then you see it. Well, he goes to the Quran, and then he goes to the Sahaba, and then he goes, okay.
Right.
So where was he at?
You mean, where was he?
Where did he come in at? After all of the Sahaba, the Tabi'in.
So he died in the year 241.
Okay. This is the question there.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, when he started to have this knowledge and he gained all of this understanding of Islam, what made him that special?
Good question. What made him that special? So let's say this. In Islam, you have students of knowledge, people who study. So you have the students of the Prophet ﷺ, who were they?
Say that again.
Who were the students of the Prophet ﷺ? The Sahaba. Good. Who were the students of the Sahaba? The Tabi, etc., etc. So in each era, right, the scholars right now know who's strong from among the scholars. That makes sense?
Okay.
Let's say, for example,
among themselves.
Let's say right
Okay, I
now,
got that.
let's say you and I play basketball. We're all NBA players. We know who's the best from among us, right? Okay. And the students that come after that, the students, meaning the Tabi, they know who's the strongest from among themselves. When Imam Ahmed came along, he compiled something called the Musnad of Imam Ahmed. There's 45 volumes of hadith, over 40,000 hadith that he listed. During that time, people would travel to get hadith, right? So they would know the scholars in different places in their level of knowledge. During the time of Imam Ahmed, you'll find that who did he study from? Who did Imam Ahmed take from? Imam al-Shafi'i.
So he came after.
He came after Imam al-Shafi'i.
Yeah, okay.
Who did Imam al-Shafi'i take from? Do you know? Imam Malik.
Okay, that's the change.
Imam Malik, who did he take from? He took from Imam Abi Hanifa. So what I'm saying to you is that there's a chain of people, and people in that time period know the levels of the people that were there. So during the time of Imam Ahmed, he was the last from the Imam to Arba, from the 4 Imams. His level was known to the people around him. That's how we know. I don't know. We go back to the books of Sirat Nahman al-Balagh, Imam al-Dhahabi. He has a book, a whole chapter about, a whole section on Imam Ahmed. You look through books of Aqidah, you look at his works. No, listen. Let's say Imam Ahmed wrote books on Aqidah, Hadith, whatever. From the time of 241 to what year are we? 1442. That's about 1,200 years. Right? He died about 1,200 years ago. So if we look back from 1,200 years ago to right now, if there was stuff about him that was not good, people would have wrote about it. They would have studied it. They would have said, no, he's weak in this area, he's weak in that area, he's weak in that area. Right? So what I'm saying is these people's lives have been studied. I'm just a recipient of it. I'm like, okay, I'm just reading information. But I'm not qualified to judge anybody in that level anyway. And as the scholars of Islam mentioned, Imam Ahmed, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Abi Hanifa, they consider them mujtahideen mutlaq, meaning they didn't follow a particular method. They was able to go themselves to the Quran and Sunnah and Ahadith. They were qualified. Now here's the thing. How many people reach that level? Not many. Not many. And as the scholars of Islam mentioned, today, in the time period we live in today, they say there are no scholars like that alive. None. Are we saying that it can never be? No, nobody's saying that. But what is said is that there are none like that today. And this is not who am I? I know this is not my statement. This is a statement that scholars make, that there are no scholars like that today. So, and I say all that to say is this. Remember how I just sat here and told you, how do you know Imam Ahmed had knowledge? How do you know that? Because the people around him. Let's look at what's going on today in our city. We have people teaching Islam that may have zero knowledge at all and no credentials at all. Zero. How is that even possible? How our religion has such great tradition and history that we reached a point in this city, in this place, where people get a platform to teach Islam and they haven't studied Islam at all. And if they did study Islam, they don't stay within their lane. They don't stop where their knowledge stopped. In fact, they kept going, they kept pushing. And this is part of the reason why we have all the commotion. How is it that a person that studied Islam in Philadelphia, for example, but can sit here and say, don't go to this masjid, don't go to that masjid, don't go to that masjid, and they don't know why. You don't have no clear evidence as to why they can't go there. No one knows anything. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. In any event, that was the event. Just have any questions? We're going to stop with that, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Oh, we have a lecture tomorrow. A one-day lecture, Tuesday, 7:15. Life of the student of knowledge and the reality of studying overseas. Life of a student of knowledge and the reality of studying overseas. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.